franchise secrets, Erik Von Horn.
Hey, in this episode of Franchise Secrets, I had my friend Zack Fishman on with Fishman PR and Jeff Herr, my business partner over at Front Street Equity Partners. And we started out talking about trends. We talked about millennials and Gen Z and just kind of the evolution of new emerging brands and what we've seen over the years and where we see it going. We got into some labor problems and what are some solutions to the labor problems that we see and how does that impact emerging brands today. We got into consultants, like why are they doing some of the things that they're doing? And they probably shouldn't be doing some of the things that they're doing, but what I've seen and how some of those trends are changing. So this is really just a conversation between the three of us that we typically have when we get together. But we want to talk about some specific things within franchising that will be helpful to both franchisees and franchisors and people that are thinking about franchising their business. So I hope you enjoy this episode. Zack, what are you? You a millennial?
I am a millennial. Yeah.
All right.
I am in the last 2 years of being a millennial. So I'm 29. So millennials stopped at age 27. So then you're Gen Z.
All right, boys, let's get to it. We got 2 Gen Xers and 1 millennial. We're going to be talking about emerging brands, trends, all kinds of fun stuff today. So, Zack, I know that you just finished up the Young Conference, which is a conference with, emerging brands, and you're doing all kinds of cool stuff in franchising. So, why don't we start there? Like, what did you see at Young Conference? Give us a little bit of context of you being a second generation person in franchising, and then let's talk about some emerging brands and trends and stuff like that.
Yeah, so I think that the first thing that I found to be interesting was that there really was a lot of folks who have had parents or grandparents even in the franchise space that happened to be there. It was probably out of the 160 people that were at the show, probably about 15% of them were people who had grown up in the space, which I thought was really fascinating. It was nice to know that I wasn't alone, number one. But number two, I think that it was interesting to see the way that they thought about business. Now, I think that it was less for this conference, in my opinion, I think the way that it has been for millennials and Gen Zs in general is that it was less around brass tacks, less around brass tacks education, because I think it's a similar concept. I know, Erik, you and I have skied many times together. When you learn how to ski at an early age, things are a lot easier for you rather than when you are somebody who starts to ski in your adult age, right? And I think that that's the way that a lot of emerging brands, until fairly recently, have kind of gone about franchising, where it was Springboard, right? We've all been to Springboard, and we know that Springboard is all about, getting as basic as you can and trying to, really, really spell it out. But I think that what I found to be fascinating was that the skill level at Young Conference, and I think what is becoming more prevalent with millennial and Gen Z entrepreneurs, is that there is just so much information out there about franchising now that maybe there wasn't when I first got into the space in a real way. And I think that and even in just the 6.5 years, that has been a major difference. And so what we found is that the skill level was able to be a little bit higher. We didn't really have to spell out the definitions of what an FDD was at this conference, which I think was very nice. But also, a lot of the people that were there came prepared with very structured questions around, it wasn't necessarily how does PE play a role in a brand? It was more around, how does this particular deal structure work within my particular industry? It was more nuanced than that, which I found to be, really refreshing. And it really, and I know, Jeff, you were asking offline around, if it turned out the way that Ryan and I hoped. And I think the answer is yes, because we felt and had the confidence that the franchise space was moving in that direction. We're now finally at a time where millennials and in some cases Gen Z have the ability to start their own businesses because they have the disposable income to do these things now. And I think that we're going to get to a point where I think that the primary franchisee candidate is going to be millennial here shortly, or it may very well will be soon, considering that the oldest millennial is 42 at the moment. So I think that there's a lot of awesome things to see on the horizon. But yeah, I mean, I think that Young Conference really bled into that, and it allowed a very nice mixture of medium-sized to emerging and even in some cases national brands too.
Hey, the way that this podcast is going to work, we can all ask follow-up questions and things like that. It's just like a conversation. Like all three spent time together and we've had some amazing conversations. So at any point, any of you kind of have a follow-up question or comment, just pipe in. So Jeff, do you have any thoughts, any comments on that?
I mean, I just realized I'm like,
you're old.
Generation Z. No, I thought I was a baby boomer, dude. Like, I
Gen
actually
X.
feel younger
You're Gen
now.
X.
I'm ready to rock. I know. I was like, wow, like I'm a Gen Xer. That's I don't even know if that's cool anymore. One day, like Gen Xers are gonna be like the most uncool people on the planet.
I think
but
we
guess
already
maybe,
are, Jeff. We just don't know it.
In my mind, I'll always be like the youngest generation. It's really interesting because I don't know if I know all the generational things. Millennial, obviously. What Generation Z is the next one?
Yeah, so that's considered. It's funny because I have to be very in tune with all of this just because of the way that I market myself and what I do. And my first podcast that I ever did was millennials and franchising. So Gen Z is from age 27 all the way down to age 12. And then it's actually called Generation Alpha. They just named it very recently. So Generation Alpha is if you have kids under the age of 12, that's what they're in, which is very interesting.
It is really interesting. I mean, this conversation's taking a different tone, but like all of a sudden I had some like things going off in my head as, you know, we look at a lot of emerging brands. Probably most of what we talk to, not a lot of mature
and
brands.
Just for context, when we say we, Jeff and I are business partners in Front Street Equity Partners, and we talk to a new brand or new brands every week that are on the cusp of franchising, or most of them have already franchised. And Zack Fishman is part of the family legacy of Fishman PR. So just to give a little bit more context, but Jeff, keep going on that, talking about these different brands that we talk to.
So as Zach was talking, like one of the things I was thinking about is, when I got into franchising about 18 years ago, and back then, like senior care was hot. I mean, senior care is probably going to be hot forever. But what's really interesting is like the seniors who are your, the customers, like eventually, like back then it was like, you want to invest in this business because it was all the metrics around baby boomers, right? Well, one day, like senior care, there's not going to be a single baby boomer to care for anymore. It'll be us, Eric, I think, or whatever's after baby boomer.
I don't like the way this discussion's going. I don't know where you're going with it either.
Yeah, well,
it's a very funny point that you make, Jeff, about this, because I think that you'll find this interesting. I happen to be talking to somebody at Young Conference who was in the senior care space, ironically, and he was somebody who was a franchisee, but he also was a franchisor of a different brand. And what he said is that there's this silver wave or silver tsunami, as they call it, with the baby boomers. But you're right. What happens when they're all gone? Because that's the way that life goes. And then you have the next generation, the Gen X generation, who listens to Nirvana and is notoriously independent and has no interest in having help from absolutely anybody at all, which is a very funny like characterization of the Gen X generation. So then there's like, okay, well, if somebody like that, generally speaking, you're going to see that the amount of people that may want senior care may decrease. But if you wait it out for 15 years, then you're going to have the neediest generation ever on the planet, with millennials who are going to want absolutely everything. And it's going to be it's so interesting to kind of hear how it changes. But yes, I think you have a fair point. Senior care, who knows how it'll go.
It'll probably be great. I mean, senior care is like McDonald's. It's like food. Like everybody's always going to need it, right? Where I was kind of going with it though, and what I was thinking about, I just get these like flashes in my brain and I got to get them out of the mouth. So what I was thinking about though is like, if I still like music from the 80s. I went to high school in the 80s, right? I like that stuff. If I play it for my kids, they're like, what is this? Turn it off, turn it down. And so when I try to take that and turn it into an analogy for brands, right? If your brand is so in tune with just one generation and it's not food, which everybody eats, or senior care, which everybody will need, it could fall out of favor one day, right? I think about it from a couple of different perspectives. I think about things like from a franchisee's perspective, right? And a lot of the franchisees that we see come into emerging brands, especially if the brand has a certain net worth requirement or a certain liquidity requirement, there is there's like an entry age point for a franchisee, just financially. And once again, I'm trying to like loop everything and categorize it all big time. But, most of the people that I think we place into emerging brands they probably start out in, maybe early 30s and they kind of go into the 50s, right? I think about like some brands that are out there that I've talked to before where I'm like, okay, I can totally see how this works now. But as the world evolves, as people get older and if your audience can't evolve, like senior care can evolve, then like, wow, you might actually like become obsolete one day. Kind of interesting. And I also think about like, how does a franchisee, like a young franchisee today, that, there's a lot of stuff around generation this or that, but the younger ones like around, a lot of talk around how much they want to work or what interests them, what makes them passionate, what gets them going. And what's kind of interesting is that, there's been this giant wave of like home services type concepts in the past. Something that I still really dig and I know is really hot now, but like, I start to question, like, is the generation alpha going to want to paint houses? Are they going to want to do gutters? I don't know. Like, what's going to even be around down the road? So like one of the things that we always think about when we're evaluating brands is like, what's the longevity, right? You got a 10-year franchise agreement, but most people today allow at least 2 renewals. So the idea is that territory, whether it's kept or passed down to or transferred to somebody else, it's got to have like a 30-year runway. Like that's how franchisors think about things. How's the customer going to change? How is the franchisee communicating with the customer base going to change? And I think that's kind of interesting. Like we like to find things that we like, what gets us excited is where a brand, we can see that like, as it goes through that maturation process of 10, 20, 30 years, that the customer base is still relevant to the business model. And obviously every business model is going to evolve, but like, what's the communication style? I have young kids. Well, not young kids, they're teenage kids. They're on their phones all the time. They're on the TikTok all the time. They're on social media all the time. I don't even know if they would know how to, I don't know if they would know how to like really understand marketing from a perspective from something like in-home services. I don't even know if it would compute. They wouldn't even know what it is. So I don't know. I kind of went on a wicked tangent there, but we started out with this generational talk. And it got me thinking like, as we look at these emerging brands, we have to think about how generations change, how the traits of those generations change, and can you carry it along the way?
What I just heard you say is the TikTok. I don't know if you actually said the TikTok, but I think she said the TikTok.
That's because that's what my mom calls it. That's what my mom calls it. I know it's TikTok and not the TikTok.
The Facebook.
It was originally called the Facebook, by the way.
I know. Attention, franchisors and franchisees. There are 2 really important resources that I want to share with you that will help you avoid costly mistakes and increase your enterprise value. The first is our free Facebook group. It's a community that has over 4,000 franchisees and franchisors in it. When somebody asks a question, they get honest and authentic answers from multiple perspectives. You can join the group for free over at franchisesecrets.com/Facebook. The second resource I want to share with you is if you're a franchisee and you want to be around a community of successful Zs and other brands and in other industries, this is why I created the Franchisee Mastermind. If you want access to the best single and multi-unit owners to know what they're doing, or if you want to be around other multi-brand owners, then you'll want to check out my Franchisee Mastermind. The reason why people join is they want access to my Rolodex, my connections, to each other. They want a shortcut success, both short-term and long-term. Links will be in the show notes or at scalablefranchise.com. Zack, what do you see? What kinds of conversations around? Because you see a ton of emerging brands. I know that because your agency is always asking them to be on my podcast. I'm always telling them no. Every now and then I get somebody who's like, yeah, I want them on the podcast. But you, through Fishman PR and your agency that works with emerging brands, and like being, one of the key figures at the Young Conference, like, what are you seeing as trends in some of these brands beyond just the founder that probably has more experience or has grown up in franchising a little bit more? What are you seeing in some trends with emerging brands? Maybe it's the space, maybe it's the technology that's in that they have, or maybe it's venture capital. I mean, what are you seeing as some of the trends that most people are not probably talking about or aware of?
I think the best place to start is probably from an industry perspective. And I think that that'll be helpful. I think that you guys will have thoughts on this. I think that, naturally I'll start with home services because it's where a lot of high finance has been focusing a hell of a lot of time in the past couple of years. And I think that where I believe it will probably go and where I think the brands will be, I think the brands that will be most successful are the ones that are not going to be tied up in certain labor problems that they may run into. And I think that is directly correlated with the brand. Like, we just had one that Aaron Harper from Rolling Suds, who won Shark Tank at Young Conference. The key to his brand, I think, is that it's a niche. And what he always says is that I can teach a monkey to do it. Right. And I think that from a staffing perspective, I think is really key from home services. And I think that really feeds across a lot of other industries too, because I think, when you're looking at the health, wellness, and beauty space, for instance, which is a space that I know you know very well, Erik, I think that it scares me a bit whenever there's people who are asking me about brands that, yes, are interesting and do have a niche. But I think that second piece of is there a specialized person that I need to hire to be able to do this? And if the answer is yes, that makes it really hard for me, right? And I think that, but you also kind of have to have that fine line where wage workers that have no purpose and are just going in there and are going to be expected to earn $12 an hour, that isn't going to fly anymore either, clearly, right? So I think that for food and beverage, it's about trying to tie it into like a company mission or something where you're going to have a bunch of rewards that you're going to be able to incentivize. It's not just about money to the people that are going to be coming up in the workforce nowadays. It's around, being able to win free Netflix or get Bulls tickets or things like that just for the right of working every day, which I know to my parents is nuts, right? But that's just the way that it's become. And so what I also see is it's about brands that have the ability to give you purpose, but at the same time don't feel empty, So I think that that's really a fine line where with home service, it's easier. Somebody who you can teach to do power washing is one thing, but having somebody to go and work in a QSR is really difficult to do nowadays. And they all lament about it. You can go listen to as many interviews that I've done, that you've done, Erik, about people talking about this in the food and beverage space. But the brands that have clearly have had no problems with this and always are the ones that I'm never surprised to hear this from are the brands that are in fast casual, in a really cool niche, that have a mixture of urban and suburban real estate, that, the brand is a little bit newer. It's not really legacy. And it always has like kind of like a cool vibe to it, right? It isn't just like your mom and dad's pizza place. Like it's like a legitimate, like interesting thing with like new and interesting food that, makes it different and exciting, right? Because there's more variety in what they're serving. And so they feel like their day is different. It's not just they're just going and cutting up pizza and they're just giving it to you. It's just very different in that regard. So yes, I think that I fundamentally believe that that's the reason that kind of this whole Chipotleization of fast casual has really changed the way that people look at, Chipotle has become boring now, which is kind of crazy, but Chipotle is struggling with trying to find workers as well. Chipotle is like mid to like mid 2000s now. Now it's like there's all these brands doing it with Indian cuisine and Asian cuisine and fusions of all of these things that just make it so interesting. And I think that that's really what it dials into for me, is around, the staffing is such a large part of it, because you have to have people to be able to open up these locations. And I know that you guys are both students of this, as you both very well know, like, franchisors aren't going to make money unless these locations actually open up, right? Like you can sell to the moon. I don't really, it's my favorite thing. Whenever somebody says to me, it always happens whenever it's like at a consultant show, right? They always say, so how many locations do you have? And they're like, well, we have this many locations. And I always have to clarify, is that open or is that sold? And they always are like, oh, that's sold. I'm like, well, that's not what I'm asking. How many do you have open? And they're like, 7. I'm like, well, no, that's a very...
It's such a garbage metric. There was some conversation about that in the Facebook group that someone posted in there. Like, I heard this, and it's such a garbage metric that franchisors use. They'll throw out how many, sometimes they'll just say, I have X amount of franchisees. You're like, wait a second, franchisees, like locations open? Like, no, total territory sold. So you just said territory sold is how many franchisees you have. And then here's the other thing, this is called franchise secrets. The other little secret is some of these brands that look like they had a really good exit, didn't have much of an exit at all because they didn't have anything that was worth much at all. So, you think about these brands, what we do at Front Street is we want to help these brands build enterprise value in compressed timeframes. But most of these franchisors that are emerging are not building enterprise value. They sell for nothing, and then it gets it looks like a success story out there. But I want to continue on with that labor aspect.
Yes,
and because I remember flying in to Minneapolis early in the morning, meeting my friend Jeff Herr there, and we're going to visit a potential brand that we're interested in. That eventually became one of our brands that I don't think we're ready to name yet. But I remember going into that first location and starting to understand the labor component. And you and I were both like, holy cow, this is amazing. So Jeff, why don't you talk about that a little bit? Because that was, I think that's one of the things that we are so in love about in this beauty brand.
For sure. I might have to the next time we're out there like visiting brands and stuff, or like when we're on calls, like I might have to ask you if Zach is listening in, because he just hit a lot of things, Eric. They're like, I mean, a little variation, but like 99% is, I mean, like you could drop a quarter in the jukebox and I would say the same thing. Like, Zach, like one of the most critical things to us is the labor component. It really is. And yes, can a monkey do it? Okay, fine. That's one perspective. Like, yes, you want a monkey to be able to do it, right? That's saying. But here's where it becomes amazing. If the customer or client experience feels like that person that is doing that service is an absolute expert, even though they need very little training to do it, that's the real magic, right? Perceived value. If the customer's like, this person is a ninja, this is the best thing that I've ever had in my life, and nobody's ever done it better, but the person on the other side doing the service is thinking like, what am I doing tonight? Like, when can I hang out with friends? Like, this is just so easy to do. Like that's where the beauty, that's where the magic actually happens. And I couldn't agree with you more. I remember we developed a massage brand, and and launched it in 2019, 18, 19. And it was really cool. One of the things that, as I started to go through like the due diligence process, one of the things that I found was, holy cow, massage schools are closing. I didn't know this, right? I mean, I was just going through the due diligence process and I'm thinking, where are we going to find the people, right? Where are we going to find the workers? And when you hear that the education system of massage is shrinking every year, but the amount of massage locations nationally is growing every year, that's a scary thought. And but when I was doing my due diligence, what I found was one of the key differentiators of this brand was they had really changed the model from an environmental design standpoint. But they also, what was great was they made it cool to work there. Like the massage therapist, they flipped the script on the employment process. The people that were massage therapists were dying to work there versus the employer dying to hire like anybody with a heartbeat, right? And so they could get better talent that way. When I think about it, like, and you know, look, I'm not trying to trash anybody's brand, but like, I know that I have 3 daughters. And if I'm like, what do you want for Christmas? They're like, I want Lululemon, right? And if I bring home like Athleta, they're going to be like, what's this? I wanted Lululemon. Now, if I think about like, hey, it's summer, you need to earn a living. Where do you want to work this summer? They're going to be like, I want to work at Lululemon, right? If the brand is tight and the brand is exciting and the brand is a real brand where it has intangible value and this law of attraction, that is a major differentiator in the employment market. If the brand itself, right, not the franchisee trying to hire people, but if the franchisee is to leverage the brand value as a differentiator to get employees, not just to hire on, but to stay and it's sticky, that's magic. That's magic, right? And yes, you have to pay a competitive wage. But if you're the cool brand, you could pay a competitive wage, but not have to overpay. Where if you're at a Me Too brand, where it's much more difficult around the labor component, maybe your only value proposition is to pay 1.5x what the cool brand's paying to get the same person. And that's obviously going to dilute the unit economics.
Zach, you know a lot about branding. Your company, like, you know, with PR, like helps people with branding and pushes out their content and just, you know, you help people in these franchisors with branding. Like honest answer, because you'll always give me an honest answer, whether on a chairlift or a podcast, doesn't matter. Well, it might matter a little bit, but let's just pretend it doesn't. Like out of all those emerging brands that you see, how many have tight branding, well thought through branding, and have what Jeff just mentioned?
I think it depends. I think it actually depends on the industry, to be totally honest. I think that what I find is that when you have a brand that's breaking into an industry that is, you know, has already been done, quite a bit. Like, let's just use fitness, for instance, because I know that you guys know a lot about this. Now,
just a
fitness
little,
in the time,
just a little.
Yeah, just a little bit. Fitness at the time in which you guys broke into the space, you know, people were really inventing this for the first time, and you guys were really some of the first people to do it,
Sure.
right? And I think that the conversation around it at that point was exciting because nobody really knew, right? And I think that it required people who, yes, there were owner operators that were in it, but it required people who had done it before to kind of take it and run with it. And that's really what, you know, Erik, you on the franchisee side, and Jeff, you really on the franchisor side did, right? And that was exciting. But now when you have a new brand in the fitness space that's breaking in now, number one, they probably missed the boat by a pretty considerable margin. And number two,
Right.
Their branding isn't really as tight because they think that they can just break in and it's just going to come easy to them, just like all of the other brands. Now, when it's in a space like, and we see this at Franchise Elevator a lot, when you're inventing a new industry within franchising, which is something that I probably say about 5 times a week, which is really cool, right? Because there's a lot of brands that are doing things for the first time. I'll give an example. And they're going to love that I'm giving them a shout out. So there is a tactical training brand that we just started working with, and you both may be wondering, what does that mean? Unfortunately, there has been an uptick of certain things happening in the U.S. within schools, right? You guys both know what I'm saying when I say that. So it requires people in certain police officers, teachers, workplaces to have certain training. And so these guys knew exactly what branding they needed to do, what note to hit, exactly how to market to a potential franchisee. Like, that's really interesting,
That's
right?
cool.
And like, I think there are a lot of examples of that where brands will be inventing a new industry and they know that they're first to market. And so, yes, it may not be perfect, but they do have kind of this evangelistic image of the way that things are supposed to be in a way that copycat brands don't, right? And I'll invoke him again, like Aaron with Rolling Suds. What I find to be so refreshing about his brand, and the reason that he won, and he had 4 private equity guys just say, I would buy the living hell out of this. And the reason that he said it was because home service isn't anything new. Like, we know that people are moving out of the cities in droves. I live in a city right now, and I have multiple friends that are my age that are moving out every single month, right? They don't want to be in cities anymore. Suburbanization is real right now, right? Home services is here to stay for a while. But what I find to be so interesting about that is that he invented this new category and had his branding so tight for that little niche that he's first to market in it. And that makes a huge difference. And I think that being first to market in something, you have almost a responsibility, which I think is so fascinating about the emerging space, where I don't need to convince them that they need PR. I don't need to convince them that they know they need money on everything, because they know that they have to, because they're the first person to do it. It's always the 27th person in category of the same hit fitness brand that I have to convince that they need to spend more than 99 cents, right? So I think that it's really interesting to kind of see that contrast. But I hope that answers your question. But it also kind of lends the question that I have for you guys. How much of this do you think, around this, how much do you think that these copycat brands are being enabled by private equity just being willing to go in and spend, just being able to go in and buy them and rewarding them for things that maybe they shouldn't be rewarded for, right? I think that, we were talking about earlier. And I want to have your guys' take on this, because I think it is interesting, around the idea of private equity firms buying off of units sold and not opened, because I think that it's a little scary to me to see that they're doing that, and that they're doing it, but they're almost basically saying, sell the living hell out of this, because I know I'll be able to open them for you. So I'll basically buy it when I know you've sold them, but you can't open them without my money.
I don't know if they're really saying that. I don't think that's the premise. They wouldn't do that. I mean, look, it's not their money, right? It's their.
Ooh, I like this. This is getting good. This is the kind of conversation that I want.
Gritty. This is getting gritty.
Jeff would say this is getting juicy.
This is getting juicy. Yeah. Oh man, I mean, this is like a whole podcast. This could be 8 podcasts. Like,
it's a rabbit hole I purposely led us to.
You just opened the box. You opened the Pandora's box. Yeah. I love that show Succession, and there's a phrase they use. They say, "This is chunky." That's chunky. Like, you just opened a very chunky topic. And honestly, it really is a longer conversation. I have a really unique perspective on private equity, very unique, because not only did I sold 22 companies to a top 10 global private equity company.
Yeah.
Which, if most people can go through one transaction, that's a lot. And I've done 22. And I'm not saying like, hey, I was an FSO and my brand sold. Like, I'm not claiming that. I'm saying I personally own 22 companies that sold to a top 10 global private equity company. I think, first of all, the private equity company thing is too big of a label, right? Everything on the planet has a spectrum. The level of private equity companies that I see dipping their toe in early, like what you just are mentioning, like really early.
Yep.
I mean, listen, I am friends with these guys, so I don't want to get any bad rap here. But on the spectrum of super global, biggest private equity company on the planet to the 9,000th small, the smallest one, we're talking about like most of the people that are private equity that are doing these type of deals, they're very far down the spectrum, right?
Yeah.
Like a TPG is not going to go buy an emerging brand with 3 units open that sold 100 in the last 12 months. They're just not going to do that, right? I mean, that's not gonna, KKR's not going to do that. Like,
No.
Carlisle's not going to do that, right?
No.
So I also applaud the private equity companies that are coming in early, right? I applaud them from one perspective, that it is supplying growth capital to businesses that if they didn't have it, might not reach their full potential.
Yeah.
I also applaud them for, I'm only going to tell you that it's probably going to expand more, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's certain metrics, like there's 4,000 franchises. There's certain metrics that everybody talks about, but nobody really knows the right number, right? So, where I'm going with this is, in the private equity world, it was always like, if you don't have $5 million worth of, EBITDA, like real EBITDA, not like one-time revenue feeding into the EBITDA. I'm talking like real EBITDA, like royalty-driven EBITDA, like nobody would touch it. Right. So
then
somebody woke up one day and said, if nobody goes to 5, why don't we go to 4? Like, we'll be the only guy.
And now it's like,
and then,
more than 0.
Yeah. Now it's like
more than 0.
Now it's like, right. You're buying a liability. You're not buying an asset. You're buying, you're buying some like thing that you're going to have. Like, I hope your loss mitigation team is like the biggest part of your firm. So it makes me nervous. It makes me less nervous. Everybody, we were one of the first people to actually build a platform. We built Exponential Fitness from scratch, took it public. And I think a lot of people saw that, hey, something that we started out with $200 million in equity is, now trading at like a market cap of like $1.5, $1.6 billion, give or take, whatever, on a daily basis. But I think a lot of people saw that like, wow, like, this is a true like franchise roll up, see through fruition, IPO it, that kind of thing. So you're seeing a lot. And before us, by the way, there was, Neighborly, which has gone through iterations of brand name. But, I think on the home services side, they certainly built a platform. There's been other people that have built platforms, especially on the food side, right? Like Rourke has multiple platforms on the food side. So I don't want to say that we're going to pioneer a platform, but now like everybody's like, we're building a platform. Like, how many times do you hear that? It's like, oh my God, do you know what that means?
Yep.
The important thing of a platform though, is you have to have what in private equity, they call the spine, right? So you can start a platform if you've got one big anchor brand, 2 big anchor brands that have they're open. There's real royalty coming in, right? You can't start a platform. I know there's people doing it, and I'm sure it's going to work out. Cross my fingers. I'm in the probability game, not the possibility game. So like what I'll tell you in the private equity world is that, especially when remember, they're making investments with money that is not theirs. It is institutional money. It's other people's money in a fund, right? So they have a fiduciary duty to make the right calls. So when I get nervous when I see somebody building, an entire platform out of like nothing brands. When we built Exponential, we had 2 spine brands that allowed us to go out and take on a brand that only had 1 unit, a brand that had 3 units, a brand that had 5 units. To try to do, we ended up with 10 when we went public. To try to do that 10 times with brands with 1, 2, 5, 10 units, I would have had the same result. I don't think it would be valued the same way today. So where I'm going with this is I think that the private equity companies that are doing the right way and building a platform, they have a spine brand or hopefully 2 spine brands. Then they can take some flyers on some emerging brands, and kind of fold them in.
It's positive. That's interesting. Let's say there's two spine brands, really strong brands. They take flyers. The way that it's marketed, the way that people see it, they're not flyers. They're thinking this is the next thing. And that's causing, buyers are not aware that, hey, this might be a flyer on this brand. They're thinking this is the next robust brand that is destined for success.
But that's how the human brain works, right? Every human being thinks that everything goes up and to the right into perpetuity. It does not. It does not. Like, whether it's the stock market, whether it's, my 22nd wedding anniversary is on Friday. And we were together for 4 years before so we're talking 26 years. I'm 49 years old. That's more than half my life. Do you think that our marriage has just been linear up and to the right for 22 years? Are you freaking crazy, man? Look, the highs come with the lows, right? And you got to have the fortitude to stick it through and keep on plugging in and believe in the mission, which is like, you're going to die together. And that's my mission. I hope it's hers. But yeah, like, I think you're right. Like, there might be, I got to start using like maybe, might, possibles. Like there might be an exuberance, a heavy exuberance on people taking, private equity companies taking chances on things that maybe they should let percolate a little bit more.
Zach, what do you think?
That's kind of what I was getting to, and I'm happy that you hit it, because I think that, yes, the KKRs and people buying Neighborly and Apex buying Authority brands and all those things, I think that they're doing it in the exact same model that I personally agree with you people should do, right? You have an anchor, you go out and you buy 3 to 4 brands. You hopefully after that point, you're cash flowing enough where you can go buy another anchor, and then you do it all again. You end up with 10 brands and you continue to do it in 5s, like over and over and over and over again, right? Which is what Neighborly did. It's what Authority Brands is in the midst of doing. It's what like Unleash Brands did with Urban Air. They added their first 4, now they're at 5, and now they want to go and add another anchor, right? That's like what it would seem logic would go towards, right? And there's a lot of other examples. But, I think that what I find whenever there are brands that are out there that, and I know that Erik, you know this very well, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts when people are going to, the consultant networks and they're selling a lot because they can. And I think that this has calmed down a lot, with brands not selling in 5, 8, 10 packs. It's kind of more being limited to 3. And I think it's being done a lot more responsibly just because people have kind of smarted up to the fact that if you're not able to open up all of these, then you're clogging up territory for me to be able to continue selling, right? And so it almost does a hindrance to you, a disservice. So I think that that's what I see a lot of, is that there is some risk. It's kind of figuring out what the risk reward is of a brand selling a lot to less franchisees and then being stuck if they don't open them all. But you're stuck in this contract with these people.
That's right.
Whereas now they're kind of getting it where it's the happy medium of, okay, I'll sell you 3. And there's a bunch of people that are being sold 3, but then they're not opening as fast as maybe 1 might, but it's better than selling 10 and then only getting 3 open in the first place. And so
I don't hear many success stories of the 10, the 12 packs, the 20 packs being sold and getting open. Like, I don't know that I've heard of one success story. I do hear people that get in with 3 or however many it is, and they've got capital behind them, and then they go acquire more. And guys, I've been on that. I've been on the side where I've acquired a lot, and it wasn't the best move that I've done either. Going back to what you were saying with the consultant's appetite to sell 6 or 10 or 12, like there's more money in it for the consultants the more that they sell. There's more money for the franchisor the more that they sell.
Well, it seems also, it's like also flashy too when you make the deal announcement. It's like, and so in Seattle bought 10. I mean, I'll tell you, it's a tightrope. It's a tightrope, right? I wouldn't be where I was today without the consultants. And I think it's almost impossible to be an emerging brand and get traction without them. I really believe that. I've never seen anybody. Very rarely do you ever hear like somebody like, oh,
can't say never. You can't say never now.
Can't say never.
That's why you switched it to very rarely.
When
you said never, I just heard crumble cookie. That's all I heard when you said never.
I think the only caveat to that, I think, is food and beverage. I think that's the only
food and beverage, which we have never done that, and I never say never, but like it's probable that we won't. But let me give you a couple of stories when I talk about like the tightrope. So we had a great brand. It was first to market in category. We spent a lot of time making it a really tight brand, and out of the gates, lead flow was insane. Lead flow was really insane, and we're doing deals, and then all of a sudden we start seeing like lead flow go down. Now we're like master closer status. Like we're like hitting like 1 in 5, 1 in 6, which is really exceptional, right?
Which means closing for every 4, 5, or 6 people that come in or leads that come in, you're closing one of them. So just
from the context, right? So like, if you're 1 in 5 or 1 in 6, like your lead flow should never go away. What happened is we were also not only were we representing the sales side, but we were also the franchisor in this brand. And we were trimming them down to 1 unit, right? And the consultants were just like, screw this. Like, I mean, I love it. The economics are great. The brand is great. The validation is great. But like, my guy's dying to buy 3 and you'll only do 1. Like, and we did some 3s, but like we were predominantly 1s. And that was the feedback I got. It was like the first time that I had ever experienced like, wow, I got something pretty awesome that everybody seems to love, but like, I can't get leads because of that, right?
Yeah, it's a give and the take. I believe, and I believe that consultants serve a really awesome purpose if they're used responsibly. And I think that there are a lot of people that do that today. There are some that may not, but I think that being done responsibly is really that key thing that I find to be such a tightrope. I think that you guys are like the perfect people to ask about this and kind of talk about it, just because, educating people on how to use consultants and how to use an FSO to act on your behalf is so important, because I think that there's almost no education on that. And I believe that that's a really big thing that emerging brands really want to know. It always comes back to how do I sell this thing and how do I evangelize my brand all across the country, right? But there isn't a right or a wrong way. But I think that people. I've always been a fan of doing a little bit of everything instead of focusing on just one thing, because it leaves you really susceptible to all out failure, where instead of being able to kind of steer the ship one way or another. So having that blend of Fran Dev, across many different avenues is what I've always been a student of.
100%.
So with consultants, I've seen some changes.
Go ahead, Jeff. I want to talk about the other side of the tightrope. So hold your comment for 1 second. So I told you one side, right? Let me tell you the other side.
Yeah.
So in 2017, I started a fund with TPG, and we wanted to roll up the boutique fitness industry. In 2018, we bought Pure Barre. Pure Barre had 550 locations and 500 franchisees. Like, I don't know if you're ever going to find a brand that is like 1.1 like locations to units sold. That's the whole oil tanker conversation, right? When you have 500 people that own 550 locations, like trying to turn the oil tanker was way more difficult. So one brand that we had, we were trying to do a lot of singles, some 3-packs. It hurt lead flow. Another brand later on down the road that we buy has that 1-to-1 ratio, but trying to get 500 people that own 500 to agree. Like it was, I don't want to get too granular on some of the things, but there was some things that was like, oh my God, this seems so simple, but like it was just too many cooks in the kitchen. So there is a balance, right? There is a balance. Now, I'm not a big fan of doing the 20-packs. I think we all agree on that, except for, food's a whole different thing. I can only comment on non-food. But what I am saying is there can be a great balance where you can consistently like make sure that the brokers are happy if you have a great brand, and you can reward the right candidates with multiple units. But then also be cognizant of like, hey, that is a good thing, because you don't want to just have this 1-to-1 ratio. So I wanted to speak to both sides of the tightrope, but Erik, I'll throw it back to you.
So go back to kind of that original question, and it really has to do with brokers overselling things or brands overselling in areas. And I've noticed it's probably been for about 5 years, conversations with different brokers, how what became more important back then, and it's still happening today, is conversations on, are they getting them open? Are they happy? Are they profitable? Are they being supported? So the health of the franchisor is definitely becoming more important to the consultants or the brokers out there. And so that's been good to see. Now that's with probably more experienced consultants or experienced brokers, people that have been around, been through a recession. They've been doing it for a while. So that's one of the things that I've seen change over the years in the whole broker network, which I think is healthy for everybody.
I'd like to throw out one thought that I have though. I think that is one of the reasons, even before COVID, like the energy towards like home service, like had begun, or if it wasn't home service, like maybe not brick and mortar. Let's just call it that. Like that started before COVID. Now I think COVID fed into that a lot, right? Like who wants to open a brick and mortar business during COVID? Then what I think happened was, I think people saw like, wait a minute, if I'm a service brand and there's no brick and mortar, I can sell 4 territories. The broker's going to be happy with that. The sales guy's going to be happy with that. And it's like, our guy's open. He's got 1 million people he can service. But like, how do you service 1 million people with 1 truck? Right. And I'll never forget, I went to a broker convention probably about 12 years ago. And I saw a really good pitch from a mature brand in home services. And they were bragging about how this one franchisee was doing $16 million. And I'm like, I'd never heard anything like that before. And one of the brokers says, well, how many territories does he have? And they said 50. And that's when I was like, that's terrible. Like that franchisor messed up so bad. This guy's got all this territory and it should be doing $100 million and it's doing $16 million. And you're bragging about this guy. Like you as a franchisor failed because yes, you got the one-time money in the franchise fees and you can claim that he's open because it's service and it's not brick and mortar and he's got 1 million people. But like, what is your market penetration? Like, how are you doing your brand service when you give somebody 1 million people and they're only servicing 1% of the potential customer base? Like, how is that any worse than like a brick and mortar brand that sold 3 and only opens 1? I actually think that that's better than like the service ones that are selling 8 territories, but it's like start out with 1 truck. And then how about that guy never getting to more than 2 trucks, right? And that same territory they were so proud to make the deal announcement that it was 10 territories could support 30 trucks. How's that any different? I think it's actually worse.
Yeah, I don't disagree.
We need to have another conversation at another time about territory management, because Jeff, you and I, when we're talking to these brands, they have no clue on territories. And then you've got mature brands that are telling them different things and they don't really know what they're talking about. You and I talk to brands that have sold a lot, but they've just done it in such a bad way and their territories are a mess. There's no management on their territories. And one of the things that you say is your territory is your gold.
It's your gold, man.
And they're looking at it. They're looking at it as quick cash flow into the franchise organization versus like building an
Eric, how many times are we on a call where we're talking to a brand and it feels like, within 5 minutes, it's like, darn it, this is pretty much a me too, right? And you're like, okay, how are you different? The two things that drive me the most insane. Number one, our service is better. Our service is better. It's just, our customers like us more. Like, how do you even quantify that, right? Like, do you have a net promoter score? No. Do you have more reviews, like more 5-star reviews? No. We just know, like, our service is better. The second thing that drives me insane is when they tell me that their differentiator and why they're better than their competitor as a me too is because their territories are bigger. I mean, I literally want to hang up the phone when I hear that. I'm like, okay, it would be a better thing for you to say our territories are a third the size. And we absolutely cover every inch of our territory. I'm dying for somebody to tell me that versus saying, well, our competitors do 100,000 households and we do 300,000. Like, okay, that you've just diluted your brand by 1/3 rather than multiplying it by 3. That's like
they're really good at decreasing enterprise value with a lot of decisions that they're making.
That's right, man.
Eric, I want something to bring up that maybe might be interesting for you to talk about with folks is kind of the emergence of how people are using consumer data and intent data in terms of how they're mapping out territories. I think it might be interesting to talk about with your mastermind or in the Facebook group or something like that.
Yeah, let's do that.
There's never been anything scientific until very recently. I mean, I know there's all these real estate techs that are out there, but I think that intent data is becoming a lot stronger and in things of that nature. And we're getting access to credit cards and credit card intent data and all of that to be able to really have put territory mapping into a science in a way that before it was like expertise, but now it's like, it's what my consultant thinks I should do. Whereas now it's like actually being put in such a fashion and where there's reliability from data that we have, which I think is really cool.
I think that'd be a fun franchisor mastermind.
Yeah. I don't know the person to talk about it, but I do know that it is something that I'm starting to see.
That's very cool.
Well, let's do it. Well, gents, I don't think this is going to be the last time the three of us are on. I had this idea when I was around both of you. I'm like, we should all just get on a call and record it and talk about some cool stuff like this. So we literally came up with this like the one question just before we hit record. So you guys up for doing more of these?
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. I think we need to talk to a Generation Alpha and bring them in on the next call.
Who knows one? I mean,
my youngest daughter is 15, so I'm out.
You've got multiple daughters that fit that, Eric.
Yeah.
We need a Generation Alpha on the next call. So what's the hot new franchise?
So if you're a Generation Alpha in franchising, hit me up. And maybe you'll come on the podcast with the three of us clowns. All right, boys. We'll talk to you later.
Bye, guys.
Thanks. Thanks for listening to the Franchise Secrets podcast. Links to everything can be found over at franchisesecrets.com. And if you want my help with anything from starting your own franchise to growing your current franchise business, please visit scalablefranchise.com.